Hi everyone, and welcome to week 11, where we're talking about feedback and writing as part of the legal research process. This is the last part of the project process, and it's often the part where people make the most mistakes, and often a lot of really good work early in the process can be jeopardized by poor planning and inability to set aside an appropriate amount of time at the very end to work through drafts and to get feedback on your writing. And this is an area where I think the academic world is responsible for a lot of bad habits that a lot of people do in professional life, do run things right up to deadlines. And I know it's human nature and everything else, but part of the problem is that you can get away with that in the academic world. I mean, you might not do very well or as well as you should be doing, but you can sort of do that last, all-nighter and get the assignment in at the last minute. And that just doesn't work in the real world. In any kind of group research or policy work process, you need to rely on members of a team, you need things to be signed off, and you need to plan your time well. I mean, you're still going to have crunch time at the end. There's no, I have no illusions about that. You're never going to be in a situation where you go, well, I've planned my time really well, so the week before a major review comes out, I'm going to be, sitting there very happily with plenty of spare time. That doesn't happen. There's always the pressure at the end. But there's a big difference between an environment where you can write an assignment on coffee and no-dos, and a project where if it's not signed off and ready to go at that point, you're in major trouble. And I noticed this myself in my first job, where I was a policy research and policy officer at EARC, and I had been used to that academic turnaround where you just sort of write something at the last minute and hope it's for the best. And when you've got a whole team working on a project together, and you've got an oversight from a board who want to see drafts and they want to give comments on drafts, whatever, you realise that that's not how real work actually works. The real work actually involves teams, and it involves a well-planned, well-orchestrated process. That being said, the academic world is kind of a little cut off from the from reality anyway. I mean, academic publishing is just as bad as assignments. When you submit something for a journal, they want the final version. They want a final proofread, referenced version, and then they send it off to reviewers, sometimes 2, sometimes 3 reviewers, who all come back with comments like, oh, can you change this, can you change this, can you move this around? And it's like, well, those sort of comments would have been a lot easier to deal with if you'd received them at a point before you'd actually finished polishing a project. But it's this sort of pathological condition that the academic world works in, and it's part of that being cut off from the real world of publishing and the real world of work. So it's something I find immensely frustrating, and it's something that I think, I've mentioned several times, we don't spend enough time with students with thinking about this process. We don't think about the importance of seeking and receiving feedback at appropriate stages. So for your portfolio this week, you'll be swapping with another student. The easiest way, there's a place in MS Teams to do this. I'll also put a forum on Moodle. A couple of people have had trouble with Teams for some reason, which will have to get sorted out before next year, because apparently next year everyone's on Teams. But we'll work through those things. But there's a couple of places where you can find people to swap with. You can always swap with people you know. If you've got an odd number of people, then you just, in a small group, like you've got 3 people, then you just swap to the left. You pass them along. You don't have to be giving someone feedback to someone who's giving you feedback by any means. But it's just really like most of the other things in this in the portfolio. It's that idea of providing a model and working through that model stage by stage, and seeing how it feels and seeing how it works, and then developing your own research model as you go on. So it is very important to get feedback. It's very important also to have a version of your work ready for feedback at an earlier stage. and that's another part of this, is to force you to, well before the final assignment's due, actually have something that's readable that you can show to someone else, and not thinking, I'll write that up at the last minute, and I'll write that up the night before. I'll have plenty of time that week, obviously. End of term is always a time when there's plenty of time to do things. This way you are actually compelled by the fact that you need to find someone to swap with to actually get these things, to get a version done, ready to go. And, it is not about presenting a finished, polished version for someone to give feedback on. It's about providing an overview and being able to have something that's readable, that makes sense. So I'm a big fan, as I've mentioned in the study guide, of using square brackets to provide filler. So you've got a whole section that's missing on, the New South Wales appeal on a particular case that's relevant. You can put in brackets, in this section I will be discussing the appeal court decision in this case. The overall impact is that it says this, and I will connect it back here. Close square brackets. And I use square brackets because they don't feature, apart from very rarely in referencing, they don't really feature in a normal set of text. So you're indicating to the reader that this is an extra piece. This is something that's still work in progress. You could use highlighter, or you could use other things as well, but I find square brackets are very clear. So you need to have, this is only a sort of a 4-page paper. Even if you've got a couple of pages of content with a few of those bridging pieces in between, that's enough, and you've got the core argument there. And that's enough for a person to read and to give you feedback. Even if your evidence and your referencing is not complete, and you put in brackets, there are some cases here I need to follow up on that will prove this, or I'm going to examine this case in the text. It gives that readability and that flow and the overall picture, so someone who can read it and give it back to you and say, yeah, it makes sense, or no, the evidence seems pretty weak here, or I know you haven't finished this section, but it's really important that you have strong evidence on this particular point, because otherwise your whole argument falls apart. And I guess what I'm also coming to here is that feedback and proofreading are two separate tasks, and really are two separate skill sets. And I know I'm a terrible proofreader. Never give me anything to proofread, because I tend to see the words that should be there, not the words that are actually there. And part of that is, I think, because I read so much, and I've got reasonably good skim reading skills, but it then makes it very hard for me to slow right down and to say, is it a that or a they that should be there. Particularly for those words that are real words, that are not going to come up as spelling mistakes, but are going to change the sense of a particular section. So I think I'm pretty good at providing the big picture feedback to people, but I'm terrible at proofreading. So if you're going to have people look at your work, it's worth having people who can do both. And you probably don't want to do the proofreader till the very, very end, till you're really ready to go. But to get feedback, you want someone who is going to tell you things like, does this make sense? When you're too close to a topic, you've got no idea whether it still makes sense or not. So having that person able to do that is very, very, very important. So anyway, this is again, the whole part of this subject is giving you that experience and working through that model, working through that ramp model, and then being able to take away from it the things that you find useful in professional life, but also to provide a place to talk about and think about these things that generally doesn't happen in a subject where we just say, go away, write an assignment and come back when it's finished. All right. Anything else I need to say about the draft? You can always ask questions of the person who's giving you feedback. And again, I use square brackets, and I will put in questions like, do you think there's enough support for this idea? Or, I'm not sure about this section. Do you think it can go? So you can be a lot more overt in your communication with the drafting process as well, and give the opportunity for the person who's giving you feedback to be able to give you direct comments on things you need to know about, rather than guess. And that's always when marking is a strange, strange set of skills in any case. And one of the things, that's an additional step beyond this exercise is to give someone is to get students to mark each other's work. That's an interesting exercise. And very, very useful from the student's point of view, because you see so many things you've never seen before when you're required to then, come at the end of the day and actually make value judgments on that work. But one of the peculiar things about feedback is that you never necessarily know what people are looking for. And people will say, well, I got terrible feedback from that person. They didn't tell me anything I needed to know. And then the question is, well, what did you ask? Now, in the normal academic environment, you don't get many opportunities to ask. Tutorials are generally the position where you're supposed to be doing that asking. And a lot of people feel, I guess, self-conscious about stopping in the middle of a tutorial and saying, hey, in my assignment, I'm doing this, and should I do this or should I do this? Particularly when the tutorial time, the workshop time, is full of other things to do. So, and then if you say, there's that awkward thing about sending things via email, and you can't get academics to give you comments on drafts, which is simply a matter of just 200 students. You can't do that for everyone, but you can answer very focused questions like, do you think this is or this? And that's all right. But generally speaking, people don't ask, and I think one of the problems with feedback is people aren't asking for things that they need to know the answers to, and quite often they don't know the questions that they need to ask about the things they need to do. So that's why feedback can often be an unsatisfying process, because if you can go into a feedback process and say, these are the things I really think I need to know about, and the person giving the feedback can come back and say, yes, here's the answer, plus I've spotted these additional things, then that's a very satisfying process. There's certainly also, and I've mentioned that in the study guide and the videos this week, a real skill at taking feedback. It's very, very difficult to take feedback effectively. And a survey we did year before last, I think, where we asked students what they actually did with their assignments when they got them back. About 30% of students never even look at them. And in fact, we know from Moodle logs that a lot of students never look at the feedback at all from the work they get. They might just look at the number that's reported, but they don't actually look at any of the feedback or comments. So we're in this strange situation where students are increasingly saying, we want more feedback, we need more feedback. But when we actually look at what students do with the feedback they have, the students who will actually take something away and read it is almost the minority of students. And even those, most of them said, I look at it, I glance over it for 5 minutes. This was an anonymous survey, so people were probably being a lot more honest than they would ordinarily be. But most people said, I just sort of glance at the comments and that's it. Learning from feedback is important. And it's also about repetition, and it's repracticing things. So I always like to use analogies. Possibly this is why I do law, because law is all about analogies. But if you were learning to play basketball, and you never listen to anything a coach said, you're not going to get any better. And you're certainly not going to get any better if you don't go back and practice the core things that you need to learn. And that's the idea of having a coach, is they can watch you practice all those core skills, and they can say, do that faster, do it slower, keep your elbows in, bend your knees, all the things that coaches tell you to do. And you can actually do that. Whereas the situation we're often in with writing is, you play a game of basketball, and then, you win or lose, and you have no idea how well you did. And the people who give you feedback, you just go, oh, look, I'll look at that later, I'll worry about that later. So I guess there's no easy fix for this. But part of the thing about any kind of improvement is, number one, getting over yourself. And that's very hard, I know it myself. But getting over yourself and going, look, okay, it hurts because I thought I did really well, and the person gave me feedback said it wasn't up to scratch. Or even worse, when people say, you give feedback to a student, you say, great work, and here are the things you could improve. And some students come back in tears and say, you said there were things that could improve. What have I done wrong? I'm terrible. I only got 55 out of 60. I'm feeling really distraught about this. And it's like, well, no, the comment was you did really well. And the idea of providing feedback is to do better next time, to actually improve even more. But there is that learned skill and getting that tough skin about going, okay, someone's got feedback for me. Now I need to be able to weigh up whether I think that's valid or not and how useful I think that is. Because just because someone's giving you feedback, you don't have to then change everything you do. However, you do need to engage with it. So this is a reasonably low-key exercise where you just swap in with a friend or someone you don't know, possibly even better, and you're looking at their comments and you're learning to observe your own process and your own response when you get feedback. And if you think about that, then you get better at getting feedback. And you get better, often you will get unreasonable feedback. Again, in the academic world, you send an article off for reviewers and you have 3 reviewers, and one reviewer will say, this wasn't the article I would have written. And it's like, well, why don't you write it if you think it's that important? And another of the 3 will probably be someone who says, I didn't read your article properly and I think it's about something completely different and I've got all these irrelevant comments. So your feedback you get, even the well-intentioned stuff is not always all that useful. But again, you need that resilience and that ability to be able to approach it in a balanced way and look at it carefully. And with grades, quite often that means having a bit of time. But making sure you diarise that time to do it later on. So you get an assignment back, you think it's a high distinction, it comes back as a credit. Very, very disappointing. Don't try and act on the feedback just then. Sleep on it, leave it a couple of days, put it in your diary for later in the week. Go over comments again. Don't leave it too long, because if you want to challenge the marking or whatever, you've got timelines running. But don't do it when you're immediately hit with the emotional effect of the disappointment. Give it some time. Give it some time to get angry about it or be upset or whatever. Get it out of your system and then go, adulting skill. I need to be able to work with feedback. Now I need to actually look very closely at this stuff and work through it. Give someone else the feedback to look at as well, someone you trust, and get their opinion on it as well. And not someone who's just going to take your side and go, oh yeah, they're a bastard, they're terrible. That's a terrible thing to say. Someone who you trust to be objective and to actually say, no, you're being silly about this, because they're giving you really good feedback. And sometimes you need that. So lots of things to think about this week. And again, this is one of these things that there's 0 time spent in the rest of the course on thinking about this, but it's such an important core skill. All right. Anything else to discuss this week? The reading is the Better Information Handbook from the Victorian Law Foundation. It's quite long. I don't expect you to read it cover to cover and memorise it all or anything like that. But it's a really interesting style guide for legal writing. It's got some very interesting points in it. And it avoids that kind of pointless, always use a 12-point font, always use a sans serif kind of sort of pettifoggery you often get in style guides. It's all thinking about communications and audience and what sort of forms of expression to use. So make sure you keep a copy of this wherever you keep things, either physically or digitally, because this is a really good thing to refer to back in later on in your career. The equilibrium section, we'll talk about the using feedback and building resilience, which I've just spoken about, but worth having another think about that. And also thinking about that, if you're the person who every term, when you do you have your say, says, I didn't get enough feedback, have a think about what can you do, not just, expecting the lecturers to do more, because, limited amount of time, and, it's hard to spend a lot of that time when you know that more than half the students are not even going to look at the comments you put on a paper. But how are you going to be proactive about that? So are you going to be one of the very few people who arranges a consult time with me after an assignment and says, look, can we talk about this? Can we talk about that? I'm not making a complaint. I'm not challenging. I just want to really talk about it. Almost no one does that. And it's the sort of thing I'm here for, so I'm very happy to do that sort of thing. But again, that relies on you being very proactive and professional about things, and not just sitting back and going, well, I'm paying for this education, it's up to them to give me a proper education. Because that's life. Life is disappointment. You never get the things you want or what you pay for. Let's be honest about it. But if you put a little bit of energy back into it, you can often get much more out of a system. So, something to think about there. And again, do think about the resilience issue as well, because it's something I think we don't talk about enough, and it's something that it is really hurtful when you get something back that you thought you did well on, and someone's criticizing you. And apparently, it can be very hurtful when you have done really well, but you're not prepared to listen to any kind of feedback or comments. So, life growing up, developing as a professional, is often about developing those senses of resilience, and being able to not take something personally and escalate it and go, well, I'm just going to give that person a really bad have your say feedback. That'll show them. They won't sleep at night knowing that 1 out of 200 students has marked them down on something, or I'm going to make a complaint or anything like that. And those kind of self-defeating things people often do in response to feeling hurt about something, rather than going, okay, I don't agree with that, but what can I learn from it? This person's more experienced than me. They know more than me. Maybe they'll be able to help me improve in ways I didn't know I needed to improve. All right. So yeah, this whole use your time well when you're at university. Don't try and rush through everything. Don't just try and done that, tick the list off. Try and think about where you can take that time to really focus on improvement. All right, so this is the second last module. So next week we're going to move in towards the end of the term. So we'll talk about those issues more then. But this week, get onto those forums or onto Teams, and find someone, or just talk to your friends. Find someone who's going to be able to help you out with this particular project.